Breakthrough Blueprint, where we talk to entrepreneurs about how they became successful today. And I have with me my amazing friend Michael, and I'll hand it over to him to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Michael Turner. I now live in Mexico City and am originally from Austin, Texas.
So, what brought you to Mexico City?
I am opening brain injury recovery centers using a compound called Ibogaine.
That's amazing. And how did you even get into this industry?
In an unfortunate way, but I think that life brings us all of our challenges for a reason. And so for me, my youngest son got involved quite heavily with drugs and opioids, and I learned about Ibogaine as a way to halt opioid addiction and was headed in that direction with him. And unfortunately, he was involved in a motorcycle accident without a helmet while he was using drugs and became severely brain damaged. And so I went and scoured the earth for a solution. Turns out the solution is the same as with opioid addiction. The solution is Ibogaine.
Wow.
And unfortunately, it's not legal in the United States. And in
Hmm.
Mexico, plants are generally unregulated. So
Hmm.
rather than wait for the FDA to get around to taking any plant medicines off of Schedule One, I decided to move to Mexico and get started now, not later.
Wow. That's amazing. And so, how long has this been in the works of you planning this business?
March of 2022 was the first time my son overdosed, and that permanently changed the trajectory of my life. And it's been the past 2 years that I've been traveling the world, speaking to any and everyone, scientists, clinicians, you name it, and learning everything that I can about ibogaine and neuroplasticity, neuroregeneration, occupational therapy, everything from the ground up of what is the best way to take an injured brain and recover it. I
Hmm.
decided in the mid part of last year to go to a country where it was legal and
Hmm.
get to work. It took 6 months to settle on Mexico City.
You said that your retreat center will be up and running, you said in the next year or so?
No, it's not a retreat center in the traditional sense
Hmm.
of how you might practice ayahuasca or a medicine ceremony. Ibogaine is something that has to be done as a strict medical intervention. And what I'm doing in traumatic brain injury recovery will be done in a more hospital like setting for the actual treatment itself. And in answer to your question, hopefully this summer, perhaps early fall.
Okay, amazing. And then so you basically then need like to have doctors and medical personnel on staff overseeing that process?
You do. So ibogaine is potentially cardiotoxic. So unlike other plant medicines, you need to go through a pre-screen where you do a 12 lead EKG and a blood test with a liver enzyme function analysis to make sure that you are a suitable candidate to do ibogaine. And then during the actual treatment itself, you are connected to a 12 lead EKG. You're under doctor supervision and you're monitored for the full time that you're under the influence of the flood dose, which on average is 8, 10, 12 hours. And on either side of that, you are in more of a hotel retreat center format. But the actual process of treating someone with Ibogaine because of its potential cardiotoxic risk needs to be mitigated by careful monitoring and screening.
Interesting. So, like, what about ibogaine makes it have that cardiotoxic risk?
It's a good question. So it is the alkaloid, and there are a number of different alkaloids, but the one that is responsible for creating glial cells in the brain, which in layman's terms, it's kind of the master cell of the brain, and it is what does the repair work. It also has the side effect of causing what's called a QT interval elongation, which is the downbeat of your heart can get longer and longer and could potentially stop. So, with proper medical supervision, if you start to become what's called bradycardic or lower and lower heartbeat, you can be treated with, for example, adrenaline, and that will bring your heart rate back up. With proper with proper medical supervision and best practices, you can minimize the potential cardiotoxic risk of there's a very safe way to do it. And outside of that best practice, in my opinion, is unadvisable.
Interesting. So, can you describe like what the experience is like? Like, is it a spiritual experience that also leads to stem cell growth?
It's a really good question. So if you think of ayahuasca or mushrooms or another plant medicine, even smoking weed or getting really drunk, your baseline is sobriety, and then you're altered in a certain way depending upon the substance that you're taking in. Depending upon the substance, it could be affecting your dopamine system or different areas of the brain. So you feel different when you're taking it. Ibogaine is for those of you tuning in that have done ayahuasca or mushrooms or something else. I would describe everything else as essentially a placebo compared to the psychoactive effect of ibogaine. It is without a doubt the most powerful psychedelic on the planet. Although the experience is different for a lot of people, the general consensus is, probably talking to some millennials. So they used to make films at a big long reel, and you could actually cut out sections of, it's like tape,
Hmm.
and piece this is before CGI and computers, and you would tape the sections of the film
Hmm.
back together, and that's the movies that you would actually see. It was, compared to what we have today, is quite archaic. Anyway, that the ibogaine experience is like taking 15-second or 10-second clips of an ungodly number of your memories and playing them before your eyes, with the catch that when you get to the end of your reel and you start the next one, you can't remember the one that just happened. So you're like, oh my God, that's really insightful. And then when you're finished, you have a memory of it, but while you're in the medicine, you're just like, wait, and I don't understand how ibogaine does it. I don't know how it conjures which memories. It seems to have an intelligence of its own, and for each person, their experience, the memories that come up are varied and different. It's actually difficult to verbalize what it's like. Even it's just not even possible to compare it, like, to say ayahuasca or psilocybin or any other medicine ceremony. It is in a league of its own.
Interesting. So, is it meant to like help you process traumatic memories in that way or confront? Okay.
Yeah, great question. So from people that I've spoken to, the less trauma you've had in your life, I've actually spoken to a few people where they've rather enjoyed it. That was my experience. I wouldn't call it enjoyable.
Hmm.
I would say it's one of the most profound experiences I've ever had in my life. It was incredibly challenging.
Hmm.
And my background, I was sent to a youth prison when I was 14 for 2 years. You can imagine that I didn't have the highest thread count on my sheets or the best attention to room service and whatnot. No turn down service, none of that. And so, with that amount of trauma in my history, it was more challenging for some friends who, frankly, went to Harvard and had a trust fund, found it quite entertaining. And and that's the general consensus, is the more trauma you
Hmm.
have, the more it will stuff it in your face.
Hmm.
And one, Dick Schwartz is the founder of Internal Family Systems. And he was explaining to me recently that it essentially, if you understand internal family systems, it turns off your protectors during the experience, and it gets to the emotions that are core to your system. So anger, for example, that's shielding you from guilt and shame and fear. A lot of times you just feel anger and rage and you don't realize that there is a layer beneath that. And I can't think of a better way to describe it than the way that Dick described it to me. It literally turns off that part of your protective spirit and tells it to you quite straight without
Hmm.
any adjectives, and just not mean, just blunt. And yeah, so that's kind of the way it addresses trauma, is it puts it in your face.
Interesting. So you're basically sort of like reliving these traumatic memories as a way to like get over them, get heal from them.
I mean, certainly with any type of psychedelic experience, if you don't do the integration afterwards, you're you're missing the boat. And are you missing half the boat, three quarters of the boat, somewhere in there? You do get something from the experience itself. I can't stress enough, though, that the integration process for ibogaine, especially for people that have similar backgrounds to what I experienced, is essential. And people should, if they try ibogaine and undergo the experience, should plan on taking some time off afterward to really digest what the experience was. It's incredibly intense. There's
Hmm.
a lot that's presented to you. It's not like going to talk therapy and covering one or two things and you're like, time's up. Great session. See you next week. It's like all the sessions at once.
Oh my gosh, I have so many questions because, like, I've been looking here. We talked about this, but I had signed up for an ayahuasca retreat in Medellin, Colombia, and I was planning on doing it. But just with the timing of my menstrual cycle, I couldn't end up doing the one in April. So they're like, okay, then here's the next one in June. But I'm not sure if I could make those dates yet. But there's that center, the Illuminating Co. in Austin. A friend who works there and is the breathwork coach. And yeah, I was looking at their different ceremonies. They do have an ibogaine ceremony. They have one that's like, I think MDMA, psilocybin, and I think they also do ayahuasca. And then, but for me, like as I've been researching these ceremonies, I went to the Naval Academy and I had very intense experience. I also, grew up in an immigrant home where I was yelled at a lot, and I have a lot of, trauma from that. And no matter how much talk therapy I've done, I still have these recurring dreams or nightmares almost on a weekly basis, no matter what I've tried. And so I was just like, okay, maybe I need to try ayahuasca. And that retreat it's a 5-day retreat with 4 ayahuasca ceremonies. And I'm just starting to learn about ibogaine, but maybe it's something that I should consider. I'm just obviously nervous and scared about the experience, but also very curious about what I'll learn about myself or the healing that will come of it. But do you find that like I know that some people do ayahuasca multiple times. I know that's not necessarily the way it's like traditionally done in a lot of tribes. Most people just do it one time, I guess. But with ibogaine, do you find people do it or need to do it multiple times, or is it just kind of a one and done?
Good question. And so with ayahuasca, generally people do it a number of times. I did ayahuasca 14 times and found a diminishing return as it progressed to the point where the last couple of ceremonies that I did wasn't really getting any additional therapeutic benefit from it. And so moved on from it. Have you ever done psychedelics or been to a medicine ceremony?
I've done psychedelics like recreationally or just like on my own. I've microdosed it in attempts to like build neuroplasticity, and I think it's had great benefits, but I don't think it was enough.
Sure. The reason that I ask, and I'll answer your question about ibogaine in a moment, is that because of how powerful of a psychedelic it is, I don't recommend to anyone that's listening to this that they go big or go home the first time. I think that it would prove to be an additive effect to trauma, not a reducing effect to trauma. And so having some experience in psychedelics, going to a medicine ceremony, for instance, ayahuasca, which, as the scale increases, you've got, drinking a beer, and then you have smoking, not the dirt weed that I smoked in college, but this 100% THC is an experience. And then you have doing psilocybin. And if you're like many people, me included, maybe you went a little big on that, and that's intense. And then you have ayahuasca, which makes the big experience on psilocybin seem pretty tame. And then you have ibogaine, and so as the scale increases, if time is on your side, if you have the personal resources and ability to do so, I would say walk yourself up that path and have it culminate with ibogaine, and you'll be as prepared as you can be for what you will experience with ibogaine. The vast majority of people that I've spoken to do ibogaine once,
Hmm.
and they're good. And this is interesting. Even though people are like, I will not do that again, I've yet to speak to anyone that wishes they hadn't done.
Hmm.
But it's pretty consistent that no one wants to do it again. Me personally, with the amount of trauma that I've experienced, I did ibogaine. I had incredible results from it. I'm actually going to practice iboga in June, which is the ibogaine. There are 11 alkaloids. The one ibogaine, which is the alkaloid that prompts glial cell production,
Mhm.
is isolated for an ibogaine treatment. When you do iboga, you're eating the root bark, and you're eating 2 big cups like this full of bark over a 2 or 3 day period. And because it is suspended in bark, it releases slowly and digests slowly. So you're talking about being under the influence for 2 to 3 days, not as intensely as ibogaine, where you're blasted off after about 45 minutes, but it's a long time to be under the influence. And this is how they traditionally practice it in Gabon, Africa,
Mhm.
where it originated, and is something that, because ibogaine is the one alkaloid from, again, just speaking to many people, doing the iboga itself is also a different experience that has different benefits and different outcome.
Mhm.
The ibogaine itself is not necessarily derived from the iboga plant. So it can be derived from a number of other plants that have ibogaine. There's actually even a technique now where you can produce ibogaine from yeast. And so, getting into the slightly esoteric, does a plant have intelligence? If you smoke Delta 9, I think it's, or maybe that's not it. There are some weeds that actually aren't, it's not weed, it's synthetic pot,
Mhm.
versus smoking the flower, or versus smoking the flower versus smoking just THC derived from hemp. Is there a point at which you've stripped out the intelligence of the plant and you're just getting a single substance? And that's not a question that I can definitively answer. My suspicion from reading, The Secret Life of Trees, I think that was by Michael Pollan, and some other books on trees, they seem to have an intelligence to them. And so my guess is, from interviewing people that have done both ibogaine and iboga, and that the experience is different, that there's certainly far more alkaloids when you take the root bark. I suspect that there is a significant difference, and that there is likely an intelligence that comes with the plant that you are not getting when you're doing just the ibogaine treatment. I'll let you know at the end of June.
I mean, and so are you doing iboga with out of curiosity, or do you feel like there's more left to unpack there?
Both. There's certainly more to unpack. I had made the decision after doing ibogaine that I will likely do it again. I am unusual in that respect. Iboga is something that, as I become a practitioner, I've also microdosed ibogaine for a year. No better guinea pig than the one on your neck. And I have now also microdosed iboga, and I've done ibogaine, and now I'll do iboga. And I will later this year travel to Gabon and practice iboga with the tribes that originally found and introduced this amazing substance to the world. So, will I get benefit out of it? Absolutely. Do I think that I need it? For sure. Would I be doing this if I weren't on the path that I'm on? Unlikely.
Wow, so interesting. I don't know if this is necessarily true, but like a friend of mine was saying how, like, oh, if you do ayahuasca, like you might never come back. Like you could lose your mind or something like that. Is that actually true with ayahuasca or ibogaine?
Sure. It actually is true for any psychedelic. And one of the contraindications that, if you're going to a reputable ayahuasca retreat or any type of medicine retreat,
Mm-hmm.
they will ask you about your psychological profile. If you are psychotic, bipolar, schizophrenic,
Mm-hmm.
you absolutely should never do psychedelics. Going and not coming back is something that has happened. It does happen. It's realistic. It's only, I wouldn't say only, but as I understand it, almost entirely of people who have specific psychological disorders. I don't know if Tourette's or other disorders would fall into that category. I do know that bipolar, schizophrenic, and people who've had psychotic breaks for sure should not be practicing psychedelics. For mainstream folks, again, it's because it's illegal. There's not a lot of clinical data. So what you get is anecdotal evidence
Mm-hmm.
over a very large sample size. I don't know any normal people that have done psychedelics and not come back. I Do you know of a couple people I can think of in particular that had those clinical backgrounds that had psychotic breaks when they did psychedelics?
Interesting. And I've also heard that people who, have addiction issues, like they've tried everything, rehab, and nothing works. But when they try, I think it's ibogaine or ayahuasca, maybe either of those, that's the thing that actually helps them completely stop their addiction. Do you know why that is?
Do. So think of ibogaine as two things. On the one side, you have this most powerful psychedelic on earth. You also have ayahuasca, which is a powerful psychedelic. So is psilocybin. So is LSD. So is MDMA. Do they have neuroplastic properties? They do. The difference is that on this side, you have the biological aspect, whereas the other psychedelics are primarily the psychological encounter that you have, the mental learning that you have from it. With ibogaine, it does something remarkable. It promotes the immediate and significant onset of glial cell production in the brain. And that is the secret sauce. It's the magic reindeer pellets. With that, and this is the proof. If you are addicted to opioids and you attempt cold turkey, you can have seizures, you can go into cardiac arrest, you have a considerably more than non-zero chance of dying from trying to go cold turkey off of opioids. However, in one flood dose of ibogaine, the vast majority of people who are very heavy opioid addicts or even heavy opioid addicts are no longer physiologically addicted to opioids. And that's not in like a month or 2 months. You're talking about in a few days. These are people who, when you're a heavy opioid user, you have to wake up a couple times at night to take more because you start going into massive withdrawal. And when people go to these ibogaine centers to be treated, because you're in this cycle of at least 8 times a day, 6 times a day, you're doing it in the airport bathroom. You might be doing it in the bathroom on the airplane. When you get off the airplane, when you take an Uber to the clinic, you might be doing it outside the door to the clinic. And unfortunately, physiological addiction, it's no longer a choice. Your body starts to implode if it doesn't get the fix that it needs in the mind to function. And
Mhm.
so it's not uncommon when heavy opioid addicts come into a center, they need to be given morphine when they get there because they literally cannot go more than a few hours without an opioid. In the United States, the way they treat opioid addiction is by giving you more opioids, which is called methadone. And there are a few others. They're less psychoactive so that you can function and perhaps go to work, but you're still giving opioids for opioid addiction. And yet with ibogaine, once you flood dose someone, and it's called tapering on and off. Maybe you start with 50 milligrams and then 100 and 200, then a flood dose, and then 200, 100, 0. Maybe it's just one flood dose. In the significant majority of cases, it's a one and done where you're no longer physiologically addicted to opioids and you physiologically don't need them anymore.
Gosh, so is that the same for any addictive or compulsive behavior, whether aside from drugs and alcohol?
It's interesting. And again, you're dealing with anecdotal evidence
Mhm.
because of the lack of clinical information at this point. It is most effective for opioids for whatever reason in the brain. It's healing the part of the brain that's causing the addictive response. It's also effective for other types of addiction. Ayahuasca is also effective. So is psilocybin and other psychedelic treatments. It's not nearly as effective as it is for opioid addiction and ibogaine. And there's a distinction that should be made. While you're no longer physiologically addicted to opioids after being treated with ibogaine, it does not mean that you're not psychologically addicted to drugs. And this is by a verifiable statistic. So if you take a population of 100 people who go to a clinic for opioid addiction, and 25% or 25 are there because they had an injury and were prescribed opioids for the pain and became addicted. And the other 75 are because their dad's an asshole or, they got bullied in school or whatever the underlying trauma is. That's a different type of addiction. They're both
Mhm.
physiological, but one is self-medicating to alleviate psychological pain, which I think there isn't anyone that doesn't know this. Psychological pain is in many cases more painful than physical pain. And so what you see with people treated for physiological addiction due to an injury, due to being prescribed an addictive medication and getting addicted to it, in 6 months, when you look at this patient population again, the vast majority of that 25% not using, fully recovered, back to their normal life, don't want to use. The vast majority of the other 75% are back on opioids. It's not 100%, but it is close. And so, again, as I said earlier, are you missing half of it or 3/4 of it by not doing integration? Yeah, it's somewhere in that neighborhood. And when you have graduated from the soft drugs, I personally could have smoked less weed and drank less alcohol in college and been healthier for it. I never graduated to addictive drugs.
Hmm.
And so we know as people that meth is addictive. There's no one even in the most uneducated person that thinks that meth isn't addictive, that thinks heroin isn't addictive. And yet, if you graduate to that level of substance abuse, as my son did, you're throwing caution to the wind and you're risking your life to self-medicate the significant trauma that is underlying, that is pushing you to that level of risk to self-medicate to reduce the pain. And in my opinion, having witnessed it, not just with my son, but other people who become addicts, I'm convinced that it's not so much of a choice.
Hmm.
It is a slippery slope that starts with telling kids that weed's bad for you. And then they smoke it and they're like, it's like smoking a cigarette. Like, why do
Yeah.
parents lie to us? And the parents also say that meth is bad for you. So there are kids, and I have a dear friend's son who went down that path where he's like, weed's fine. Why can't I smoke meth? 30 years later, he's still a meth addict. And it's a death sentence for a lot of people. Once you're hooked, sometimes you can't get off of it. And so is it a choice? There's always the exception to the rule, but on the whole, no, I don't believe it's a choice. It's trauma-based self-medication. It's getting addicted because of an injury. It's getting addicted because you didn't understand that parents only lie about that, but not that. And when you discredit someone who's telling you something that's good or bad, then you generally don't trust them. It's like court lawyer 101, discredit the witness. It's unfortunate. That's why they're called gateway drugs.
Hmm.
And so, this is the situation that you get into. And I think that when you look at the population specifically of opioid addicts, the fact that people who become addicted because of injuries and prescription versus addicted through self-medication, it's clear that there's a very psychological aspect to addiction where becoming no longer physiologically addicted, I would say, gives you a prayer that you have a window of opportunity to go do therapy, to do integration, to understand your trauma, to get over it. Because the best therapist in the world, if you're having to fix yourself 6 to 8 times a day, is not going to be able to help you.
Yeah.
And so there's that window of opportunity to do integration. And unfortunately, just looking at the numbers, the vast majority of people that get off of opioids are so relieved to have their life back that they skip the integration process. And that leads them right back to opioids, the vast majority within 6 months.
So, can you describe what a recommended integration process is, like after Ibogaine, for instance?
And there are so many possibilities out there for ways to integrate.
Hmm.
If and it somewhat depends on why you were traumatized. So if you were a soldier, I was speaking with a Israeli special forces young man, he's 22 years old. He moved to Mexico City to overcome his PTSD, and he's done ayahuasca, he's done psilocybin. He has a traumatic brain injury. He was special forces launching shoulder mounted rockets and reverberating his body and head not 5, 10, but hundreds of times. And so for him, obviously being special forces, you're in close and you're doing what soldiers do to defend what you believe in. And that in itself has psychological trauma. For this young man, and I really appreciate his service to his cause and country, he's not going to recover, in my opinion, until he's treated with Ibogaine. And I connected him with a doctor that can help him, because what he has is a traumatic brain injury, and
Hmm.
traumatic brain injuries cause the fight or flight reaction. It's your amygdala saying, hey, I don't trust you, frontal cortex, because you keep short circuiting on me, and I'm afraid you're going to get us both killed.
Hmm.
And the reptilian brain, if I throw a tennis ball at your head, it's not going to ask the frontal cortex if it wants to get hit or not. It's going to move its head away.
Yeah.
And this is reactive. We don't have control
Hmm.
over our amygdala. Try to hold your breath until you pass out and see how successful you're at. Eventually your amygdala will be like, that's really, really funny. No. And so it depends on where your trauma comes from.
Yeah.
This gentleman moved to Mexico, is doing the work. I don't believe he will get there without curing his traumatic brain injury. If you've been the victim of sexual assault and you don't address the sexual assault with the properly skilled therapist that has dealt with that particular type of trauma,
Hmm.
it's unlikely that you're going to recover from that type of feeling unsafe in the world.
Yeah.
If you have childhood trauma that started at a young age, internal family systems can be incredibly effective. It's been a game changer for me.
Hmm.
If any of the viewers have read the book How the Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, on a somatic level, you can search for the answers up here, but a lot of your emotions are actually from the neck down. And
Yeah.
if you don't move those emotions, not the originating thoughts like, that guy is such an asshole, he pisses me off, that's here.
Hmm.
But the feeling that you might get, like for me, anger is felt in my solar plexus, and moving that energy out of my body is focusing on the feeling of the energy and moving it, as opposed to, the guy is such a prick, he really pisses me off. This, you can go see a therapist and spend hundreds of dollars about an hour explaining what a jerk this guy is. But if you don't move the energy, it becomes stagnant.
Yeah.
And if you ask Bessel, he'll tell you that it's stored in your organs. I remember from a conversation with him that anger is stored in your liver. Why? Special. I don't know. But it's bizarre the way that this works,
Yeah.
but it does. And internal family systems, if you read books on it, it actually is a combination of cerebral and somatics. And so if I had to say, look, you can only do two things, you don't get a third, you don't get a I would say somatic therapy and internal family systems for everyone, whether you're sexually abused, whether you had a difficult childhood, whether you were like me and got tossed in a cage at 14. That said, there are so many different modalities that have been proven effective. Breath work, interestingly, is one of the most effective forms of therapy, and it's cheap too. It's called
Yeah.
free. Yoga, movement, Qigong, Tai Chi. One of the most important, if not the most important aspects of recovery, is finding deep human connections.
Mm.
You can do all the therapy in the world, but if you don't bring it back to what makes us human, which is connecting with other people, you're not going to succeed.
Yeah.
You're just not. And I think people bypass that as one of the essential aspects of becoming well. It's so important that the Surgeon General, I think it was last year, came out with a report saying that drug addiction is not the greatest pandemic facing America. It's loneliness.
Hmm.
And loneliness can shorten your life.
Yeah.
Loneliness is one of the most devastating aspects of human survival in such a modern age, where
Yeah.
we're not in villages and tribes, where we can go through the world and walk down the street in Manhattan and be the loneliest person on earth. And so I'll add a third to IFS and somatic therapy, and that is, you got to get out there and spend time with people and make friends and connections. It is essential.
Definitely. Completely agree. I mean, I have so many more questions, but I guess that since you've been on this path, I'm curious like how these experiences have changed your idea of spirituality or God, or because like, I grew up in a Christian family. I don't consider myself religious anymore, but I've been learning more about like epigenetics, about past lives. I've done so many different things and efforts to like heal and understand myself. And going back to addiction, I've had friends throughout my life who have been really addicted to alcohol, and it's ruined our friendship. And my grandfather on my dad's side was born in North Korea. He lived through the Japanese occupation and the Korean War, and he died before I was born because he was an alcoholic. And he was an alcoholic because he was depressed and angry, and he died of cirrhosis of the liver. And so, I've just been like thinking about all of these things and how trauma is passed down and inherited, whether that's genetically or spiritually. I'm curious, like, what your perspective is on all of this.
Sure. I mean, you can look at, I'm sorry to hear about your family. It's tragic. If we don't address our trauma, it will follow us to our grave. And unfortunately, it will follow us most likely to an earlier grave. And so my heart goes out to not just you and your family, but anyone who personally or has family members or friends or loved ones that falls into the trap of self-medicating as a way to find the light at the end of the tunnel. The only light at the end of that tunnel is a train, and it's going to hit you eventually. I think it was Mark Twain. I'll answer your question about epigenetics. I think it was Mark Twain that said that no one in the history of this planet has ever blamed their success on alcohol. I think it's true. And so where can you look to science and understand whether or not there's truth to epigenetic selection and how it affects us psychologically? So this is interesting. With regard to epigenetics, we have great grandchildren of concentration camp survivors. So there may not have been a greater stressor to man than that experience. And you're talking about 4 generations later, the great grandchildren are still epigenetically selecting for stress. I don't think there's any greater indication that we are not born with a clean slate, that we come with the baggage of our parents and our grandparents and our great grandparents. And who knows how far that goes back. But it is undeniably clear that we are a product of the generations prior to us, which makes a huge amount of sense. It makes sense how we, as mankind, have been able to traverse the planet with each generation acclimatizing to different food, to different climate, to different environments. If it weren't like that, mankind would, and animals around the world, would not be able to migrate into different conditions unless they were collecting data, if you will, from.
Really? Yeah, that's really fascinating. So, I guess then what is your perspective on like God?
So interesting question. I wasn't planning to answer it, but why not? God exists depending upon how you define it. So if you read the Old Testament, God is everything. It's the sun, the moon, the stars, it's us, it's our cat. If you study quantum physics, everything is connected in what's called string theory, that every molecule in my body sitting in my home is connected to every molecule in your body and everything else on this planet and arguably everything else in the universe. They call it spooky physics because it's creepy, but it's real. Last May, I was in Jordan and I climbed up a rock face to take a picture, and the rock face collapsed on me. And I was forced to jump off a cliff to save my life and almost died. The rock came 100th, maybe 1,000th of a second from getting me, and it didn't. And this was videoed by the person that I was with. So I replayed it many times. You can't tell that the rock didn't hit me. It was that close.
Mm,
And for a split second, a momentary glimpse, I saw beyond this world into what I later learned by speaking to people who've had near-death experiences. What
mhm,
I believe I saw was universal consciousness. So is there a God? Depending upon how you define it,
mhm.
I believe what I saw was universal consciousness. I believe that we're connected to it in a certain way. I believe that physics explains it to a large degree.
Mhm.
I can see what I saw as clear as when it happened, and it's been seen many times by many people. I became quite curious about what I saw and went down that rabbit hole. And what I saw is the same as what a lot of people have seen.
Yeah,
So if God is, as it says in the Old Testament, it's the sun, it's the moon, it's the stars, it's everything, and universal consciousness is just that, then absolutely there's a God.
amazing. I think that's a great place to wrap this up. And I would love to have you on again in 6 to 12 months and see what's going on then. But thank you so much for joining me
Yep.
today.
Can't wait to speak to you in 6 to 12 months and see where this has all led. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast and for your time, and really appreciate what you're doing.
For everyone else, please tune into the next episode of the Breakthrough Blueprint.